Thank you. We're going to get straight to our panelists just with a couple of notes. The first thing is everybody's program should have come with a pen and a card, a 3x5 card. The 3x5 card are the way in which you're going to ask questions. And so as the panel proceeds, if a question comes to you that's of interest, then please write it on the 3x5 card as legibly as you can. I'm going to be the question moderator to try to make sure we don't have a lot of duplicates and that sort of thing. I do want to remind everybody of the definition of a question. A question is a single sentence that ends with an interrogative. And it really should fit on a 3x5 card. Okay, so please, one question and have it make a real question. Then when each of the panelists has spoken, each one will speak from between 7 and 10 minutes. Then at that time, I'm going to ask if you've written a question down, that you sort of hold your card up and someone will pick them up. And while the panelists then give some responses to their own work, I will collect those and then I will ask the questions of the panelists on your behalf. If your question is directed to a specific person on the panel, please note that. Okay, so Dr. Sherman, Dr. Ahmad, Dr. Ott, or Dr. Larry, or Lorray, or me if you want, but it's for the panel. Then if it's for everybody, you can say to all as well, but we're more likely to get a good response from a single individual than a whole group of them. Okay, so that's the questions, and now let's proceed. The question that I've asked each of our panelists to consider and to speak about for 17 minutes is, what is the most important single challenge of AI to faith and practice, and religious practice? I know that nobody's going to have a single one, so I understand that. But we are going to try to keep it short. So, and I'm going to go in this order. I'm going to ask Dr. Sherman first.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be here, and thanks for coming out. I got hung up on that one word single as well, because so many things were rushing into my mind. There are, of course, profound ethical justice issues that come with AI. There are profound issues when people begin using AI for companionship and so on. But if I were to pick one single one, I might say it's the sort of epistemic issue. It's the issue that AI can change the way we think and can change the way that we perceive the world. There's something called latent persuasion that social scientists have discovered with AI, that when you're using AI to complete your sentences in an email and every text, and when your word processor is prompting you with suggestions for how to complete a sentence, it's like having a little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder that's kind of whispering in your ear and saying, well, why don't you finish it this way? And social scientists are beginning to discover that this actually changes our opinions about the world, about things. Large language models are not neutral pieces of technology. They embed a worldview, they have a bias, and then that comes out when we use them, of course. And so as people of the faith who are interested in truth, who are interested in a worldview, especially working out of the Christian tradition, one that's embedded in the biblical story, that has a certain way of looking at the world, I think these tools, if they become ubiquitous, have a profound possibility of changing the way we think and perceive the world. So if I had to pick one, but I could give you a list of many more if you gave me time. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, well, first, I'm one of those kind of people that loves to talk. So if I don't prepare things, I'll go way over my minutes. So I am going to read what I have prepared. And I'm flipping the question a little bit, because what I want to raise as a concern for us to think about is how AI has forced us to perhaps rethink what we mean by human, and how that leads to a variety of questions, but especially some justice issues. And I'm taking a bit of the cue from Kate Darling, if anyone's read her book, The New Breed, What Our History with Animals Reveals About Our Future with Robots. In this text, she asks us to pay more attention to the puppet master than the puppet when we are theorizing both about AI and robots. So in my own field in Christian ethics, we have spent centuries, this is my opinion, we have spent centuries wielding the philosophical category of rationality, sifted through theological anthropology, to decide the, quote, humans who are outside humanism, as Donna Haraway would say. The preeminent ethical human or moral agent has been considered rational, individualist, educated or learned, and chosen in a religious sense. As we move fully into an age of AI, as Dr. Hunt has noted in this lovely synopsis he provided for us, this leads me to wonder, what have we lost by letting this story about divinely ordained human nature permeate how we treat the environment, invest in a hierarchy of human value, and now respond to smart machines? This version of human occupies a theologically and philosophically exceptionalist category that reflects some people descriptively and even fewer prescriptively. In this line of discourse, too many people have never counted as human. Currently, it also reflects how many technologists and everyday citizens view forms of AI. That is to say, this version of human seems to be a lot more like AI than most of us. So what if this is a moment to finally rethink how we think about humans? What world might we create and cohabit if we primarily considered humans to be communal, deliberative, interdependent, and holistically embodied? At least for me, this is a much closer description to what we see in the life of Jesus as modeled for our incarnational way of being. As a Christian ethicist, I've been wondering how communities have historically responded to similar advances. Social ethics and the social gospel movement was founded somewhat in response to the Industrial Revolution, a massive shift in worker needs, family configuration, and a move away from land-based economic livelihoods. In response, there were major theological shifts during this time. This is a random note, but I don't think it's odd that the newest pope chose his namesake after Pope Leo XIII, right, who authored Rerum Novarum, the encyclical that serves as the foundation for modern Catholic social teaching, with the cause of poverty alleviation and labor rights at its core. It's also echoed in the Pope's newest encyclical. In a 30-second nutshell, the theological shift that happens in the social gospel movement and social ethics is a move away from individual salvation theologies to considering social sin and the moral requirement for action and justice in the here and now. This led to pastors and theologians at the forefront of workers' rights movement, child labor abolition, voting rights activism, and both the creation of and call for government investment in social safety net programs, including opening their own healthcare clinics, night schools, and food programs. So what theological and moral shifts are we experiencing in this AI technological revolution at a time of unprecedented planetary strain? How might we resist what Felicia Wu Song calls the soft tyranny of the digital age? The social shaping effect of technologic that drives rapid response and deterministic acquiescence to predictive machines, or what Kate Crawford calls enchanted determinism. How might we instead restore communal moral discernment to guide a collective engaged response, much like what took place in the social gospel era? And I have other thoughts or propositions on what we might do to start ushering those in, but I'm sure that'll come up in more conversation.
Thanks very much. And this reminds me that you've mentioned two important authors, and I will try to collect some other bibliographic information that we can redistribute to this group later on who to read, and certainly Felicia Wu's one, Restless Devices. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Ahmed.
All right, excellent. Thank you for having me. So first, when I saw the question, I thought I should talk about something transcendental, something very profound. And then I realized maybe I should talk about, since we're talking about religiosity and spirituality, and of course it's transcendental and profound, but it's also very mundane. It's also something which is supposed to be part of our everyday life. So in the context of AI, I would say it is affecting our relationship with religion itself, how we practice religion and spirituality. Lot of faith traditions and also spiritual traditions talk about faith as a journey, as a process. What the other panelists have already alluded to is that a risk that we currently have is that with AI and large language models, given their nature, they give us ready-made answers. There's almost never a pushback. So if you ask it a question and let's say, of course, they say that there are no stupid questions, but let's assume that there's a stupid questions. Even if you ask such a question, it will almost always say, "Oh, that's a very interesting question. That's very profound." Because there is no pushback, I think there's this risk that we are getting ready-made answers. And if you extrapolate this to the future, or even the near future, then maybe people will ask, do I really need to go and talk to my pastor who will push back? I can just go and talk to ChatGPT or Gemini, and they'll just give me what I want to hear. And the thing is, this process may actually not be very conscious in nature. The other aspect of that is just our relationship with other humans. How is that already being impacted by chatbots? There are already literally tens of millions of people who are spending upwards of 8 hours a day interacting with chatbots. And if you're one of them, please do not raise your hand. The danger that I foresee is that there'll be enough people who'll say that relationships with real people, they are messy. Sometimes people suck. Sometimes more than sometimes. But in some sense, they're at least real. With chatbots, with simulations, we have this possibility that we can create these systems tailored to our whims and desires. So that just takes the struggle aspect of relationship, of religious practice, of spirituality is just out of the equation. And it raises very uncomfortable questions even about, well, what does it mean to be a human? And then lastly, I'll just end this with, I mentioned that I connected with something very personal, and it may seem that I'm contradicting everything that I've already said, which is that, so an experiment that I've been running in my whole household for the last almost 10 years is that, so when my dad passed away back in 2013, and for the last 8-9 years, I've been running a simulation of my dad, not for myself, but for my kids. And what I've seen is that if I'm not deliberate about what is going on, then my kids, they can easily fall into the trap of, there's some sense, an element of realness with which the system that they are interacting with.
Okay, thank you. Relationships are messy. I'm reminded of a Friends episode in which I don't even remember which two characters have a fight, and the guy goes, "Oh my gosh, I guess our relationship's over," and the woman goes, "No, this is how we work through things and have a better relationship." Relationships are messy. Okay, Dr. Larry.
Thank you very much for this invitation to come and speak with you this evening. It's a delight for me to be here and talk about something which is so important. The single most important issue has already been stated by the other panelists, and that is what makes us human. A lot of my students ask me, what should I study? And I said, you should concentrate on what makes us uniquely human and leave everything else aside, because the AIs are going to be able to do that eventually. However, Robert is also correct that I have more than one. There are three issues that I wanted to mention very quickly from a philosophical point of view. I teach philosophy at Boston College, and so I'm addressing the issue from a philosophical point of view. By the way, Kate, Pope Leo is working on his encyclical on AI, which I've been told is coming out in the first week of May, which is when the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See is sponsoring a forum, a conference on artificial intelligence, and I'll be there. Number one is reasoning. One of my pet peeves is when you query an AI, and this is common to almost all of them, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Anthropic's Claude, they take a second and they say thinking, and some say reasoning, okay? They're not. Machines don't reason unless we change the meaning of the word. Very briefly, from Plato up until today, most philosophers understand the human intellect as twofold. One, primarily dealing with empirical evidence or data, and the other, abstract thought. The most famous ones, of course, are Aristotle, Plato, Kant, Thomas Aquinas, Heidegger, etc. Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, but almost all philosophers, whatever their ilk, is to say that the human intellect has these two stages. Now, the second one, for Kant, is when we apply the categories of the mind to the data of experience, which he calls intuition. A machine doesn't do that. A machine can't do that. So what some of my friends in Silicon Valley have told me is that we need to enlarge the meaning of the word reasoning. And I would be okay with that. I would be okay with that, or, which I think is even better, let's come up with another term. One of the terms that I have come up with, and Sam Altman seems to accept it to a certain degree, is meta language. So what the AI is doing when between accepting your query and giving you an answer in language is metalinguistic. If you like, it's very philosophical. We could get into that more, but it also may be boring. Number two is consciousness. We do not have an adequate scientific understanding of what human consciousness is. And David Chalmers, probably the most famous author on this subject, says, how are we going to know if a machine is conscious if we don't even know how to tell if a human being is conscious? This is a very complicated issue. We talk about solipsism, which is the view that only the subject is conscious and everyone else is a projection of my consciousness. We talk about the difference between human beings, which are self-aware, and other animals which are conscious, but they're not self-aware. For example, dogs, which are probably emotionally closest animals to human beings. And of course, according to Catholic tradition, consciousness results from the presence of the soul. And finally, immortality. There are many people in Silicon Valley spending a lot of money on the search for immortality or radical life extension. Probably the most famous is Jeff Bezos, who gave $10 billion to establish what's called Altos Lab. But remember, Larry Page, co-founder of Google, also has a lab for life extension. And many, many others. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book called Fantastic Journey, and the subtitle is Live Long Enough to Live Forever. Now, according to, and I'll finish quickly, Robert. According to Catholic doctrine, the human being is not immortal. The soul is immortal, which is the principle of being of the human being. So the body dies, but the soul continues to exist. What many people in Silicon Valley are looking for is immortality of the body and of the soul. That oftentimes they don't talk about the soul, they just talk about the person. And it's probably because they don't believe in an afterlife. This is the only life we have. And therefore, they're striving to make human beings immortal through the use of artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Let's take 25 seconds. 25 seconds. Be still. Okay. Think about your questions and then begin writing them down and holding them up so that as we now respond to these statements, we can pick up the questions and deliver them to me to moderate. Okay. Yeah. So that's the next thing. Now, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to respond to, enlarge upon, et cetera, these very interesting ideas that have been raised. And I'm not going to summarize them for you because I think they'll come back again. But if I could, I'm going to go in a slightly different order and ask that Dr. Ott begin. In fact, I think we're just going to go straight down just so the rest of you are prepared. Okay?
I'm actually, you don't have to answer my questions, but I'm fascinated by what you said at the end. So one thing that I think, Derek, you had commented on as well, I probably am in a different space, given what I've heard, of where I think relationality might exist between AI models and humans at certain points. And so your use of an AI model to continue the memory and interaction and possibility for your children with your father fascinates me because I actually think there's a lot of potential there. And I wonder at some point if we can have some conversation about whether we, as a new species, will need to extend, from a Christian sense, something like neighbor love as we create these kinds of relationships and interactions. And I say that right now more from a point of our own moral formation, in the sense that how we interact with the environment, with animals, with machines, forms us. And every time we let go of that because we think those things are lesser than us, I actually think that does moral harm to us. So I'm putting that out there as a question of how we might start to think about these things. And I have a more concrete question, which is what might be the limits or possibilities of how we think of the spirit or spirit's ability to move and infuse through our encounters with machines. So I am not giving AI or a machine any sort of soul or anything like that. I'm trying to extend the moral interaction to the encounter itself. And sort of Cutter Calloway's notion that it's the interface of our skin and the encounter. So might there be some possibility, for example, I teach in my class that we have to think in Christian ethics, a source of our ethics is also our ancestors. And whether those ancestors are carried through memory or through interactive design that you've created, there's in some sense spirit moving there from my Christian point of view, because of the encounter that's created there. So anyway, I wonder if you want to talk about it, how you think about that space and interaction.
Okay, so Dr. Hoffman, please.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for the question. So what I found useful, one very useful way to think about this is actually outside my own tradition, is that how, there's very little literature on this, but because it's a very recent phenomenon, is how from a Taoist / Confucian perspective, how people have thought about. So there's a whole genre of these chat bots. They're known as ghost bots or dead bots, and how they think about these things. So from a Taoist perspective, everything is change, right? So think of a person. So just say, think of your parents. So when you're a child, you have a certain relationship with them. And then you grow old, that relationship changes. So when you're a child, you're dependent upon them, of course. And then when they're old, then that relationship may flip, that they are now more dependent on you. And so Taoist perspective is that there's continuity in this. And when that person passes away, then let's say if there's a ghost bot of that person that you're interacting with, that relationship is still there. It is immaterial if they are physically present or not. But at the very minimum, the relationship is there. That person, in some essence, you're interacting with them. So there's continuity in that sense. So I found that perspective to be very useful. And then beyond that, I would say my case is also a little bit unique because we are talking about not adults, but children who have a very different sense of of even very, let's say, simple things like, what does it even mean to be alive? So if you go and talk, and I do have a 2-year-old, she's at that age where she's almost started to form sentences. But I would imagine if I have a conversation with her 6 months from now, then children are animists. So like everything around them is, especially when they're 2 or 3, everything around them is alive. So the chair is alive, the table is alive, right? So like, for example, in Asian cultures, if your child hits a chair, then you say, oh, bad chair, don't do it next time. So there's that. So I've also seen that there, and I'll just end with this short story. So during COVID, when most people were just limited to just interacting with their neighbors or people online, so my older one, she was 2 at that time, when she met her aunt after the first time after COVID, she was extremely surprised that her aunt actually existed outside of the cell phone. So I think we have to think about these. How are we conceptualizing these relationships and how they're evolving over the course of time?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to mention, I teach world religions and I teach a study in cross-cultural understandings of what it means to be a human in a doctoral seminar. I do think it's important to think outside our culture on all of these issues. Okay, so, Dr. Schumann.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up the strand about grief and grief bots as well. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I lost my wife 2 years ago, my dear wife of 34 years. And through my own personal experience of dealing with grief, I was fascinated by the notion of grief bots. But I've become convinced through my own experience that there's no way around or over or under grief. It's something you have to go through, and that a relationship with a grief bot actually interferes with the healing process, and that a relationship with a grief bot or an AI girlfriend, for that matter, is a relationship of one person, which actually damages you for real world relationships. And I think you mentioned this, real world relationships are messy. They're not about you. They ought not to be about you. And so I've been thinking a lot about this lately. If you're interested, I wrote an article called Artificial Intelligence and Grief. It's posted by AI and Faith, where I talk a bit about my own experience with this. But I think it's rooted in, and I think as Christians, coming out of a Christian worldview, we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, the social science is showing that people who have AI companions actually are more lonely. They have more problematic social isolation. There's all kinds of things that the social science is saying, which I think is completely consistent. I think you call that natural law. It's basically showing, that we were made to be in relationship with each other, that we're distinctly made in the imago Dei. And that machines don't have that. The people are people and machines are machines. And I think some of the efforts to actually seek, to solve the problem of death are based on the same presuppositions. The idea that if we can, with fidelity, simulate the human brain inside of a machine, we can capture the essence of what it means to be human, which is a highly reductionistic view about what it means to be human, right? In the Christian tradition, we are a it's it can't be boiled down to the electrochemical reactions in our brain. It's a highly problematic anthropology. And in the Christian tradition, we're taught this right from the first chapter of Genesis. And this idea of being made in the image of God and how we're distinct. And so I think that ought to inform how we ought to use the machine. So we've got to start with what is AI? So an ontological question, and then from there only can we move to the next question, ethically, what's an appropriate way to use that? And I think 2,000 years of Christian social thought and Jewish thought prior to that has a lot to say in this moment. I think this ought to be the moment for philosophers and theologians. We need you guys in computer science. I mean, heaven help us if it's up to the computer scientists as to what kind of world we're going to build. This is your moment, because you guys have been talking about this for millennia. And so maybe I should stop talking and let him continue the conversation.
Thanks very much. I'm going to, one more time, if you've got questions and got a card, raise them up so we can pick them up. Dr. Luray, please.
Character AI is being sued by a woman from Florida whose 14-year-old son committed suicide after a couple of months of interacting with the chatbot. Meta and YouTube both lost their lawsuits, one in New Mexico and one in Los Angeles, which were brought by parents suing them, Meta, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, because they did not warn adolescents of the addictive nature of social media. Two quick things. Number one is the program of human flourishing at Harvard University. You can just Google that. You'll find a lot of resources and a lot of empirical evidence of what has just been said. Interacting with a chatbot makes you more lonely. 2 years ago, Harvard hosted a conference in San Francisco where I spoke, and there were many psychologists, lawyers, professors, and CEOs of companies about loneliness. The subject was about loneliness. And it was very, very clear that interacting with an AI does not help you become less lonely. So I would just reiterate what the other panelists have already said. I will mention something that Kate brought up that made me think about a recent publication by Anthropic. And we've invited Dario Amadei to come to Rome, and we hope he will, although it's going to be quite controversial because of recent events in the Pentagon. But Dario is convinced that within 2 or 3 years, Claude is the AI model of Anthropic, will become relationable. You will be able to enter into a relation with Claude. Sam Altman has said the same thing. I disagree. I agree with what the other panelists say. It's right now, it's a one-way street. It's the person interacting with the AI. Dario is convinced that eventually it's going to become a two-way street. And that would be exactly what Kate is suggesting would overcome the limitation of interacting with an AI. I just don't know. I don't know if that is the case. Right now, interacting with AIs are very insatisfactory. And sometimes the students say, I have an AI girlfriend, and I'm like, you have 14,000 people on campus, and Boston College is a very enclosed place. It's on Chestnut Hill. I don't know if you're familiar with that. SMU seems to be more in the city. But Boston College is very enclosed. 14,000 people. You can't find someone that you would be willing to interact with or have a cup of coffee with or go see a movie, and you have to spend 4 or 5 hours a night with an AI. And it happens. It happens. They prefer the AI, and I'm saddened by that. But I think Kate also mentioned that. I agree with her.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Just at least 2 quick things. The first is that I think the way that companion AIs are designed is problematic. I don't know that I think the premise that a companion AI could never be a helpful thing to a human is a good thing to move forward with. Like, I actually think there are probably lots of ways that variously designed companion AIs might be helpful, both educationally, to fill in relational gaps when they're there. So never as a replacement, but like, we are relational people. Why not have more relationships, right? I love my dogs. I love my dogs more than some humans. That's not a bad thing, right? But I also love a bunch of humans, right? And there might be times when, I can't get the pastoral care that I need, but a 5-minute interaction with a really well-designed therapeutic AI, not ChatGPT. Part of our problem is people are using models that weren't designed for their purpose. But there are some models out there that are designed for those purposes, and they might be really helpful. I don't guarantee. I wonder if the young adult who says, I'd rather have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever companion, chooses that because it is actually really hard right now, because of the way we have structured our society, to go randomly meet someone, to feel comfortable, to have had any educational or relational education prior to this, to know how to interact with another human and say, I like you. Like, those are big risks. What if some of those companion AIs were built in a way that educated and helped in that regard rather than replaced? So anyway, I want to complicate it a little bit more, and also have some sympathy from my perspective for those people. I also think, as many times as we want to cite some of the AIs and social media that are causing problems, I want us to equally look at our analog society and wonder how the rate of suicide of young adults is caused by all kinds of things, not just interacting on social media. It might be exacerbated by that, but from my perspective, if we are people of faith, we got a lot of offline work to do, and I don't want us to only demonize online places for that.
Thank you. Okay, I obviously have more questions here than we're going to get to tonight. I'm just going to say this right off bat. I want to make a couple of comments. I mentioned a couple of other books. One, Catherine Hales wrote a book called How We Became Posthuman. This was back in the 90s. I would say this is an absolute must, even though it's incredibly hard to read. So I'm just going to say that up front. A guy named Owen Masters, who posts a lot on LinkedIn, is doing a lot of stuff that works on her work and some of the questions that have just been raised. So I would just mention that if somebody you want to look up. AI and Faith is a website and a group. I'm involved in this as a scholar, others are. I think that's worth looking up, AI and Faith, if you don't have enough stuff to read. And then on the questions that we have that are related to eternity, immortality, and this sort of thing, if you want to go with some fiction, there's a really lovely book. Lovely, that's not the right word. The title is Fall or Dodge in Hell by Neal Stephenson, Neal Stephenson. Really a classic book imagining what happens when everybody decides to be immortal by being virtual. Now, this is a trigger warning for Neal Stephenson. His target audience is 19 to 25-year-old males. Okay, so I'm just...
like Damon or Ready Player 1 and 2.
Yes, there's if you were looking for a little more, but again, in the bibliography I'll provide you, there's actually a very wide range of other kinds of writers of speculative and science fiction that deal with these issues. Okay, so I'm going to try to get the questions that I think we haven't talked about yet. And the first one that comes to mind is, and it's just addressed to everybody, but if you think of yourself as someone who's thought about this a lot, how about embodiment and bodilessness of AI, and what happens when AI becomes embodied? Anybody want to jump in on this? Go ahead, Larry, Dr. Larry.
Human beings are incarnate, just as Jesus Christ became incarnate in the womb of the Blessed Mother. Now, AIs cannot become embodied in that way. I guess, Robert, you're referring to an AI in a robot.
I think that's the question, yes.
Okay. And I love science fiction. Westworld, for example, is a great example of this also. so is the Matrix, and so is Blade Runner, and there's a bunch of others. I thank Robert for mentioning Neil Stevenson. I'm going to read that book now. But an AI will never have a body. It can have a material external shell if we want. And some people are even say, like Ray Kurzweil would say, that the AI is the soul of the robot. Well, it's not. To get a soul, I mean, if we want to delve into this, it takes a lot of philosophical maturity from Aristotle to today to talk about what a soul is. And I've had debates with, I'm sorry, I get a little excited, but some of the software engineers at Google, and I think Kate just mentioned this, talk to me about what is happening and their desire to do what's called mind uploading, and that is somehow capture the human consciousness in a digital format. And I said, okay, I'm sorry to tell you, but that's not possible. And they come back to me saying, why can't we just separate the soul from the body? And I said, you can. That's called death. So, oh no, we don't want to kill anybody. And I said, I know, but thank you so much for endorsing. Brad Smith, also the president of Microsoft, has been in Rome many times, and he says the same thing. But he's not the CEO, but he is the president. And he says, Microsoft is not looking for engineers, we're looking for philosophers. So that's a great phrase. Because of, and I'll finish with this notion, because of the substantial union between the soul and the body, you cannot separate the two, except at the time of death. If we want to talk more about embodiment, we can, but I think that's kind of the point.
So this would be the position of the Catholic Church. Okay,
I'm a Catholic priest, so
I understand it. Yeah, so there's another nice short story by Terry Bissett called "They're Made of Meat," which explores the concept of whether there could not be an alternative kind of embodiment. I'll just mention that.
I mean, also, there's lots of people who have various forms of disabilities and things that don't match with like our everyday version of what we think embodiment requires of us, right? So I think there's a much wider spectrum of how we might think about embodiment. And there's also lots of great research that demonstrates that we actually bring our embodied sense of self with us when we experience things like VR and any forms of extended reality. So that complicates it even more.
Yes, so that turns out to be complicated. This is probably equally complicated, but I think it falls in the realm of a lot of concerns here, which is, I'm just going to read the question out. I know a lot of people object to AI because of environmental concerns. And what are your thoughts? It says, what are your thoughts? It's obviously not asking me, it's asking you all. What are your thoughts on this? What is a faithful response related to care of the earth and AI in the environment? And maybe I'll ask if two people have spoken a little bit more. Dr. Schumann, perhaps you or Dr. Ahmad would like to address this.
Yeah, no, I think this is a significant thing to keep in mind. In the Christian tradition, again, as well, we believe that God has given us this cultural mandate to care for the earth and its creatures, and our technical activities have an impact, a physical impact on the world. And you've, I'm sure, read the headlines about how much water and power these data centers are vacuuming up. So I think as a computer scientist, I would not, dismiss out of hand this new technology, but say, we ought to use it responsibly, which means you don't just make cat pictures out of a nano banana, just for the fun of it. When you're going to be using AI, you ought to be doing it for a purpose, because behind the query, behind things, there are consequences. And I would say that, in terms of energy, some of the recent papers that have been coming out, that a standard chatbot query, single query, is about equivalent to, I think, it's on the order of 3 or 6 seconds 3 or 6 seconds of running a microwave. So it's on that order of energy. And so, so if there's a good reason to do that, then I wouldn't dismiss that out of hand. I think this is a rich area of research, the whole area of green computing, the area of building smaller, more efficient models. I mean, you can actually download some of the open source models and run them in your own laptop now if you've got a good chunk of memory and GPU power. I think there's ways of doing this that could be less impactful. But every time you stream a Netflix video, every time you send an email, there's an energy cost to that. And I think we need to add this into our calculus of what, making sure that we don't use these things for trivial uses, knowing that there is an environmental cost behind the scenes. And then maybe pressuring behind the scenes for more responsible energy policies for companies and to reduce the greenhouse gases and other things that result from that. So that those are just some random thoughts.
So again, you've complicated the question a little bit.
Yes.
Dr. Hoffman, yeah.
I guess you have not only complicated the question, but also covered most of the things that I wanted to address. So I'll just add a couple. So one is that, so we have already seen that because we are building these data centers in mainly rural areas, there have been a number of cases, one in Eastern Washington, where the local population is no longer able to get the water that they need. All of that is being just gobbled by these large organizations. So there's that very practical, very real impact on local communities, which, given that we live in large cities, is just hidden from our eyes. So there's that. The other thing is that I would also expand this question, because we were talking about ethics of using AI, beyond just the environmental aspect. Just think about how these models, these large language models, were trained to begin with. By any definition, and no matter how we stretch these definitions, the data that was used to create these, literally almost all of these LLMs, is basically theft. These authors, they did not agree that their books, what they had written, should be and would be used. So Silicon Valley had this, and it's unfortunate, had this habit that build first, break things, and pay fine later. So what's the worst that can happen? All right, we'll build this thing, and they will fine us $100 billion. Well, that's actually not a whole lot of money. So the question that, and there are other people of faith who have addressed this question, which is that, so given that these models, they were created via unauthorized use of the data, how ethical it is for us to actually use these models on a day-to-day basis? And you can make one end of the spectrum, you can make the argument that, well, these things are so ubiquitous that it's just not possible to not use them. So that's where what you were saying earlier, that the usage has to be very deliberate. Do I really need to use these models? That said, I'll just end with this, that there have been some movement of building quote unquote ethical models. So the government of Switzerland has released one where the whole pipeline from sourcing the data, how even the energy which is being used to build these models, the computing infrastructure, that's also green. So there are efforts around that domain.
Thank you very much. I want to add one other thing to this. It's fairly well accepted and well known now that the human capacity to imagine how to use the models falls far short of their capabilities. And of course, one of the ethical things that this means is that we don't have to use the best, most expensive, power-intensive model for a lot of the things we want to do with AI. And so we do have choices about our energy consumption with these tools. We don't always have, I could actually get to work by driving an 18-wheeler that gets 3 miles to every gallon of diesel, but it might not be the best way for me to go to work, right? Okay, I'm gonna press on here with a question that I'm gonna take, and then I'm gonna go back to you guys. Should you tell a chatbot thank you after it completes a request? Or please before you do it? Now, Sam Altman has said no because he thinks this costs something in tokens. But I want to just point out for all of us that this has always been a deeper question. There's another question in the very back there. This has always been a deeper question of how do you form the habits you have when you relate to anything or anyone? Okay, there's one over here too. And so I'm just going to leave that as a question. the way in which we behave in relation to anything, dogs, cats, etc., rocks, stones, and leaves, forms habits of relationship. And so we have to ask ourselves, what's it doing to me when I do or do not? Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, should the present or coming generation be in a panic about AI? Maybe we can leave this to yes, no, or maybe answers. But this is for all four of you. Yeah.
Panic, no, but concerned, yes. There's a lot of talk about existential risks involved in autonomous AIs. Many famous people like Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Eliezer Yudkowsky, Steve Wozniak, they've all said that AI has the capability of destroying the human race. So even Elon says, his own AI program, but he says a 99% chance of succeeding is not enough, because that 1% could destroy all of humanity. And Max Tegmark, who teaches at MIT, which is only about 20 minutes away from Boston College, he's a wonderful friend, and he's been to the Vatican several times. He's also very concerned. So, long answer again, Robert. Panic, no, but concerned, yes.
Do others want to contribute to this? Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Don't panic. But I do think there's lots of reason for concern, which has all been mentioned already. I think we have a testimony in the Reformed tradition that goes something like, in a world where some seek to control and which others view with despair, we declare boldly that our world belongs to God. So I think as Christians, we always have hope. But if humanity makes bad decisions, there's always consequences. And so when I talk to my students too, I try to give them some reason for hope that God is still in control. But also to focus on, the things that they have control over. And one of those things is the kind of person they're becoming, to focus on virtue formation, on becoming the kinds of people that can cultivate wisdom, that can cultivate courage that they're going to need, prudence, humility. All of these sorts of things, I think, are going to be timeless, are going to serve us really, really well in a world that's going to be uncertain. The only thing that'll be certain is that, we will need the virtue in order to rise to the challenges that we're facing, knowing with confidence that God is ultimately in control. So that's a quick answer.
Great. Yeah.
So I guess I'll say also the same thing, that do not panic, but yes, there are reasons to be concerned. But as a counterpoint to what people like, let's say, Elon Musk or Max Tegmark are saying, is that, so there's another AI researcher, Andrew Ng, and he has quote that when I'm teaching machine learning, I always mention this in the first slide, is that, so worrying about AI taking over is equivalent to worrying about overpopulation on Mars. So why? Because first you have to go to Mars, land on Mars. Then over the course of decades, or most likely centuries, you'll have to have enough people and maybe terraform it, and maybe it'll take tens of thousands of years. So sure, maybe one day it will be a problem, but right now, there are other more mundane, more pressing problems that AI is causing. So we already talked about the environmental effect there. So we also talked about loneliness. Big issue is just around fairness and bias. There have been literally dozens of cases where an AI facial recognition system unfairly marked, and unfortunately it's almost always an African-American person, and they had to go and spend time in jail even though they were innocent. There have been other cases where AI has been responsible for cutting benefits for people, because now we can also hide behind the fact that, oh, it's not human decision making, it's AI, and AI cannot be biased. And of course, AI can be biased because it's being trained over human data. So I think, yes, we should be concerned, but I think there are a lot of issues, mundane issues, that we should be concerned more. So basically, think about right now.
Okay, thank you. Doctor.
Okay, after listening to all of them, I think you should panic. If only because panic will make you do something. Right? I really My tradition is you are the hands and feet of God in the world. You've got to be the people who do something. We're going to be the people who either fight for regulation or get out there and do something to change the environmental effects of this, who make a choice about not doing a Google AI search, but just doing a regular old plain old search where you're going to find the same damn thing, right? Like, you can make choices on everyday levels. And I actually think if we don't start to really worry about it, we don't get activated and we don't move. And please, please, please don't let the we have to solve the biggest problem in the world stop you from solving the smallest one that's affecting your friend or affecting yourself, that you can get some community together around and do something about, right? Like, maybe it's just an issue of how AI is used here, and you want to talk about that with a group of people. Like, yeah, panic, so it makes you do something about it. Be the hands and feet of God in the world.
Thank you. I'm going to recommend another movie, AI, the documentary. Handles this nicely in some ways. Okay. I came across a card that is Rabbi Zvi. I don't know who you are back in the back there. But this looks typically rabbinic. It's a question that's really a statement. If God could put a soul into a human, why could he not put a soul into a machine? This is a question we've already discussed, but I think that's too good to pass up.
I don't.
Yeah.
Whenever I get into religious debates, which is every day with my colleagues, about the limits of this, I fully am Methodist in this regard, and probably only this regard. I fully believe Philip Wogman's statement that too much moral certainty about God's ways does not allow God to be God. And so my response is, I don't know. And I think it's a better world if we live with that uncertainty. Okay, well, we're going to turn to practice now. The next question had to do with, when does AI become a moral agent? And given our time, I'm going to simply mention that this is a hot topic right now. What is moral agency? What constitutes moral agency? Who is responsible when AI does something like encourages suicide, right? And that's 4 days worth of debate right now. So we're going to leave that as a question that's hanging over us while we turn to a couple of people who had practical questions, addressed really to Dr. Ray, but also everyone. And I'm going to put two questions together here because they both are going to elicit the same kind of response. What are the acceptable ways to use artificial intelligence in parish life while making sure that our virtues are not being compromised and that we do not rely on earthly creations while seeking heavenly bequests, okay? As a Christian woman pursuing her master's in AI, how should I balance Christian ethics with my future career in a field that goes against many Christian values at times? So these are both quite pragmatic questions. Life in the parish, I'm going to mention that I teach a course called AI in Christian Ministry. But life in the parish, how does this relate to our life, our faith life, our church life, and then our work life as we get caught more and more in these things? So I'll ask the whole panel, but the first question was directed to you, Dr. Roy.
In less than 30 seconds, right?
Yeah.
I don't think applications of artificial intelligence at a parish level is very effective. I think people seek out other people in a parish. I think a parish is primarily a community of worship, among all kinds of other things. Having said that, there are a lot of uses of AI within a parish. For example, the people who run the finance department, and it goes on and on. Next week, I have to give a talk in New Orleans to 250 HR Catholics who are worried about losing their job. And they're very common in the parish network. In terms of Christian ethics, again, I know that there are many different views on this. My view is that it is a tool. AI is a tool, and the way we use it is what makes it ethical or not. Some people disagree with that. By the very nature of an AI, it is an ethical agent. I don't know. I think the ethical or moral aspect of artificial intelligence depends on the way we use it and the humans that are guiding it. Short answer.
Okay, thanks. Do others want to contribute? Dr. Sherman, Dr. Ahmad, Dr. Ott? Yeah. No, it's not so much. Okay. Yeah, jump in, please.
About ethics and AI?
Yeah, the ethics of using AI.
Yeah. No, I think we start with I teach the capstone course for our computer science students, and one of the premises that we start with is that technology is not neutral. That built within it is a certain bias to use it in a certain way. I mean, the data in AI is biased. Even the algorithms have a certain bias because they tend to zoom in on larger groups rather than smaller groups in order to get a better minimization function. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that it's biased. So we begin with that. So if technology is not neutral, then the people who make the technology have an ethical obligation to shape it in a way that leads to human flourishing. So that they're like, making technology is a way of doing ethics. Concretely. And so thinking about AI in terms of being able to direct it in a way that leads to human flourishing and planetary flourishing is what we teach our students. And then one of the frameworks that we use is something called norms. So we say that God created the creation in such a way that it's tuned to certain norms. These are not random. If you go against the grain of creation, you get splinters. And these norms include things like justice. They include things like social norms, the way that we live together in community, conviviality. They include things like the trust norm, being able to make things that are reliable and dependable. Norms such as cultural appropriateness, norms such as stewardship, and so on. So we have a list of about 7 or 8 norms, and we have our students do a normative analysis of their design before and after when they do their senior projects at Calvin University. They have to not only build some real cool technology, but they have to be able to do a normative analysis. Whenever you're building a technical artifact, there are social, political, environmental, and so on, justice implications always baked in, and they can't be an afterthought. And so the ethics are all the way down, and they start right from the beginning. And so that's something we have to be. One of the problems in Silicon Valley is that computer scientists are not trained to think about these things, or it's a single course they add to the end of a curriculum, and they assume that makes an ethical computer scientist, which it doesn't. Right. I could say more.
Thanks. Go ahead. I'm going to mention something from the head of our Guildhall here was talking about. Guildhall is our SMU school of gaming, of creating computer games and virtual networks. And Gary Brubaker told me one time, we were talking about ethics in gaming. He's a good United Methodist, by the way. Said to me one time that what they want their people to understand is that when you create a computer game, you are the god of a virtual world. And in that role, you're making the rules. So you need to think about what the rules are. And are those rules reflective of the kind of world you want the people playing the game to live in? And I think this is true of AI. This is a human creation. We're creating it. It's true of the way we use it. A good old Anglican friend of mine once said, we are each little gods of our own world, and we've been given a lot of responsibility. And some of those are for making rules, right? We need to take that responsibility seriously. Okay, that's probably heretical, but don't check me on that. We're coming to the end of the time. I think, is that right? Yeah, we're close in on it. Yeah. What I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists. We'll chill for 20 seconds. Each of the panelists to think for a few seconds and then see if you've got one last thing you want to say that's pretty short. Then I will kind of wrap things up if I may. And then I'll ask Matt to say the closing words of this, or sorry, Lisa, we'll do it, our chaplain. And then we'll be out of here. I want to thank you all in advance for coming. Okay, so let's go this direction this time. Dr. Ott, you start. We'll go straight down. Closing statement.
Okay, if I had a magic wand, I would want AI designed for empathy instead of sycophancy. I would want AI to expand our relational opportunities, not replace them. I would want AI to be localized and contextualized. And I think our planet and perhaps AI needs more rights that also reflect our own human needs.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman.
So I would say that, so Lutfi Zadeh, who's the founder of Fuzzy Logic, he has a famous quote that if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we were talking about the culture in Silicon Valley, and my background is in computer science, and I can attest that this is the default way a lot of computer scientists think that everything is an engineering problem and it can be solved. And then after spending a lot of time and effort, they realize that it cannot be solved. And I think the other thing that we need is for ethics to be baked in how we teach engineering in general. So I truly believe that at least theoretically, we live in what should be the golden age of philosophy, because engineering problems are also moral problems, not as an afterthought, but let's say one of the most famous examples is self-driving cars. So we have to think about decisions of life and death when they're making these systems.
Dr. Shimon.
Yeah, what I find most fascinating I'm trained as an engineer, is that most of this is being animated by stories, right? So there is a story of sort of a utopian vision of AI saving the world that many in Silicon Valley hold to. There's dystopian stories. The AI documentary, this movie, the AI doc, actually covers both of these in a really fun way. And I think as Christians, the biblical story also has a profound way of helping us shape how we see this. So speaking as a Christian, I think, if you think of the arc of the biblical narrative, creation, fall, redemption, new creation, right? We can see how technology and AI fits within that. AI is part of the latent potential in creation. It's not a surprise to God that we're able to unfold these things. Sin came into the world, the human family, somewhere near the beginning, fell into sin, and that has an impact on everything, including our technical work. And so all of our technology is now intertwined with the effects of sin. And as Christians now, we're called to be agents of reconciliation. We're called to work responsibly to unfold these things in ways that are obedient to God and answer his calls to love our neighbor and to care for the earth and its creatures. And of course, the end of the biblical story is not that we build the New Jerusalem, but that the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven. God does not subcontract it to us. So everything that we do is actually just building some imperfect models of the perfect world to come. And I think that working and living within the biblical story, I think will lead to a much more responsible technology. And I think it's a much more hopeful story. But anyways, yeah.
Dr. Luray.
Many people ask me if AI is of God's will. And I think the other panelists have really said it correctly, that it is. God gave us the power to create. God gave us intelligence, and we are creating the AIs. Robert mentioned this also. At the same time, Sheryl Sandberg, who used to be COO of Facebook, at a meeting in Davos in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum, said, "Let's not leave the future in the hands of guys with hoodies," which is ironic because Mark Zuckerberg was famous at the time for wearing hoodies. And we have to be in control of this technology. We can't give up control of the AIs. Now, there's a tendency to do that because the more autonomous the models become, not just the large language models, but others, the better they are. And this is going to be a tendency that we're going to see for a long time. But the moment we decide to give complete autonomy to the AIs is the moment that we create our own demise. It was said before, people may make bad decisions about this. All of us here are very concerned, and we're working with people that are building these models, trying to convince them of the Christian ethics and the necessity to make, I think Derek said, to make them help human flourishing and not the opposite.
Thank you. So we've had 4 kinds of calls to action here. I'm going to add a 5th. One thing we didn't talk about at all is the incredibly rapid pace of change in the development of AI. I've followed this fairly closely now for more than a decade. I think it's fair to say that more has happened in the last 4 months than happened in the previous 20 years. And we're going to see this increase. And so my call to action to you all is, and especially those of you who are on campus with me, it shouldn't be left to someone like me, a 70-year-old historian who happens to have some technical expertise, to follow this. We are going to have people of faith, willing to take the time to track the changes and be engaged in it. Not everybody has to do it, but somebody has to do it. It cannot just be the guys that are blogging and stuff like this that come out of the industry. So that's my charge to you. Over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. I first want to thank each of you for being here tonight. If you've never been to anything for the Center for Faith and Learning, this is a great introduction because you all have really embodied and exemplified what we mean by joining the life of the mind and the life of the spirit. So thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being here and for your interest in this topic and in that integration of life, mind, body, and spirit. If you enjoyed the conversation, if you enjoyed the wine, beer, cheese, and macaroni and cheese that's fried with a little remoulade sauce, everything that we do is through the generosity of private donors. We mentioned the Foss Foundation earlier. There is a QR code on the back of your program. And if you enjoyed anything about tonight, we would welcome you to join us in making more events like this possible on campus. I want to thank our panelists first and Robert, our moderator. When Matthew wanted to do this program, we did something like this prior to my arrival many years ago. And I said, why do we want to do that again? And he said, well, things are changing. I said, well, call Robert Hunt. And Robert has been our expert. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for making the trip to Dallas. I know it's a major commitment to travel, particularly in the middle of the week when all of you have responsibilities on your campuses. So thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you to Matthew Wilson for his leadership, and especially to Jenna Stegemoller, who is our program coordinator and did everything that made tonight enjoyable, is thanks to Jenna. So thank you, Jenna. And finally, before we leave, I want to announce next year's symposium. We are we're about to celebrate, we're sort of in that season of celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Center for Faith and Learning that was established in 2016. And our next academic year will be full of celebrations of this 10th anniversary. And we're pleased to announce a year ahead of time, which is a goal we've had at least since I got here, that next year's symposium will be on April 13th, so about the same time next year. And our keynote speaker will be Dr. Kim Cape, who is a leader in United Methodist Higher Education, and we'll be talking about Methodist values in our universities and what it means to live out our Methodist heritage, identity, and ethos, not just here at SMU, but in universities more broadly. And our hope is to sort of expand the symposium to have some sort of breakout conversations around that keynote. So it might bleed into the 14th if you want to mark your calendars for that as well, but more information coming on that. So we hope you'll join us again next year and for other things. But again, thank you to our panelists. Thanks to all of you, and go in peace to connect with other human beings, but also engage the wisdom of AI.